All right, so I have noon here on the East Coast, so we are going to get started. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We are going to be talking about spotted lanternfly today in this webinar. Let's see here. So one thing to cover before we get started is we are now Rainbow Ecoscience. We used to be known by our name Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements. However, we did change it, and then we did this in order to simplify our name and to better capture how we have evolved the way we serve and support companies, municipalities, and organizations like yours. We also did this without losing the legacy of our company from the last 25 years. We're excited about this change, and you will see this reflected in all areas of our company moving forwards. I'd like to start off today. Safety is one of our core values, and it's really important. So for those of you who are at home or in an office setting, make sure you check around you for any trips or trip hazards or anything like that. The weather in certain areas of the country is a little bit inclement and hazardous. So if you're in any of that, make sure you're being careful. If you are in your vehicle, make sure you are parked in a safe location as well. A little bit about me. My name is Mark Ware. I am an arborologist with Rainbow Ecoscience. That's my contact information there as well. If you've never heard of an arborologist, there's a really good reason for that. And that is basically that it is a made up word. It's a made up position. And unless you work for Rainbow, it really doesn't mean anything. However, what it basically means is, and how I can serve you as a client is I'm responsible for training and education on plant healthcare protocols, technical and field support of our products and equipments, and for plant healthcare education. I also do a little bit of research and development work and things of that nature. My background, I've been in the green industry, mostly the ornamental landscape and arboriculture industry for the last 11 years now. 8 years of that was with a national tree care company where I did general tree work, but primarily plant health care. My educational background is in landscape instruction and ornamental horticulture, and I have a degree from Williamson College of the Trades in a little corner of southeastern Pennsylvania. A little bit of housekeeping before we really get into it. If you have any questions throughout the course of this presentation, I'd ask you to put them in the Q&A box. That will enable us to keep track of it a little bit better. And then at the end, we will go through those questions and answer them. I'm hoping to have a decent amount of time in order to do that. This webinar is being recorded, and there will be a link that's sent out afterwards. So keep an eye on your email for that. This webinar is worth 1 ISA CEU. So if you did not enter your ISA certification number during registration, I'd ask that you would also put that into the Q&A box, just so that we have a record of it and you can get credit for participating in this webinar. At the very end, and in case we go over, my coworker Allison, who's in the background here, and if you have any technical issues as far as sound or video or whatever, you can also put that in the Q&A box, and Allison will help you address that. But we will be flashing up an ISA code at the very end. And just to alleviate any concerns, that's just for your reference should you want to know what the course code is. We on our end will take care of all the submitting for credits. So there's nothing you need to do in order for that. And with that being said, we're ready to jump into it. So today's objectives are, we want to become familiar with spotted lanternfly, the threat, and kind of like what it is. We're going to go through the biology. We want to identify the life stages. We want to be able to identify it, period. And then we're going to understand our treatment options and be able to recommend management options that are based on our clients' pest tolerance levels. Couple key distinctions regarding spotted lanternfly is it has led to grapevine mortality. Although it is still early, it appears to be more of a nuisance pest in landscapes. It is a nuisance pest in landscapes. While its feeding can ultimately lead to secondary pests that will potentially lead to mortality. Just spotted lanternfly feeding by itself will not kill most ornamental trees and shrubs. It does have very different life stages that feed on different parts of the plants. It feeds on numerous plant species, but it does prefer specific hosts at different specific times. It is spreading rapidly, and it is very, very easy to move accidentally. That is a key point, and we'll get more into that later on. There are quarantines in place and measures that do need to be followed, especially up here in the northeastern states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware are the big ones. We do have great options, including Transtect and Transtect Infusible, as well as bifenthrin to help us control this pest, as well as treatments. We want to base them on client tolerance, and we will get into that towards the end. As far as what spotted lanternfly is, it is not a beetle, it is not a moth, it is not a butterfly. It is in the true bug family. It is a plant hopper from China, and it has a piercing, sucking mouthpart. If you look underneath of this photo, I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but it looks like a leg almost, but it's actually its mouthpart. So it kind of comes down and then back, and they will pierce this and feed directly from the phloem of the plant. A couple other true bugs that are in this family are cicadas, aphids, adelgids, whiteflies, and everybody's favorite, scale. And real quick, as a sidebar, for those of you, if any of you are on the East Coast and interested in East Coast Mid-Atlantic scales, on Thursday, we have another webinar on that. So make sure you sign up for that if you're interested in that. And that's my pitch on that. So spotted lanternfly comes to the USA. It was discovered in September of 2014 in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. It was imported along with a shipment of stone. Entomologists believe it was actually established back in 2012. But the particular stone yard that imported this, they import over 150 shipments annually from China and other countries in that area. So, you know, it was only a matter of time is I guess kind of what it seems like. Since then, it has spread to quite a few states. This is the current, as of October 1st, this is the current map of where it actually is. This is from New York IPM. And if you see the blue areas, the counties that are shaded in blue are where we have current infestations. And if you look, there's red borders around some of those, and that is where there are current quarantine areas in effect. It's hard to see, I admit, but the purple dots in some of the other counties is where there has been either a hitchhiker or individual find of spotted lanternfly, but there has not been infestation found yet. One thing about this map that is really an important takeaway, and it's why I really like showing this map during these webinars and presentations, is if you look right down the middle of Pennsylvania, how we have that line almost of blue that shoots out west. That line almost follows exactly the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is a major trucking route in this area. And then if you look along the western border of Virginia there, those blue counties that infestations have been found in are basically following I-80, which is another huge trucking route. And that really just goes to show you that humans are one of the main reasons that this pest is spreading as quickly and as far as it is. As we get into the life cycle, you'll see how these things will lay eggs on just about anything. And that's important to consider as we you know, when we look at this map and we learn about what we're going to learn down the road here with our life cycle. All of those things really go to show that as humans, we're responsible for really why this thing is spreading. It's not like it can fly that great. It doesn't really fly that great. So it's a hitchhiker. To give you a better idea of how fast this thing really is moving, this is the yearly population growth between 2018 and 2020. In 2018, it covered only 5,600 square miles. In 2019, that jumped up to 13,000 square miles. And then in 2020, it was covering 20,000 plus square miles. So just an enormous rate of growth and spread. This all matters because this map, put out by the USDA, is the expected range. So this map takes into consideration the climate and areas and host availability in the United States. So this map shows where the climate's suitable and the hosts are suitable that this spotted lanternfly could potentially spread to. And so right now you see, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey is kind of where it currently is, but it has the potential to spread much, much further and have much, much more impact on the United States. Specifically, if you look over at California, you can see, if you're familiar where Napa Valley is at all, that shaded area of orange is smack dab right where Napa Valley is. So we want to protect them because one of the things we're going to be talking about is how this thing affects grapevines. It will kill grapevines. So that's going to be very important for those of us who like wine, that it doesn't get there. What kind of damage does spotted lanternfly do? So now we know where it's got the potential to spread. We know where it's at right now, but why does it matter? And the reason it matters is because SLF will feed on several agricultural crops, and it particularly enjoys grapes and apples, as well as hops. So if you're a beer drinker as well, it's important. It will not feed on the fruit, but rather it will feed on the branches and the vines. It will still affect the fruit because as it feeds, it secretes honeydew. And that honeydew will drop onto any fruit that is below them, and we get what's called sooty mold growing on top of that. So if you look at that bottom right picture there, you can see an apple, or I'm pretty sure it's an apple covered in sooty mold. And so if you're going to pick your own with your family, and all the apples look like that, you might not be as enthusiastic as when you first got there about picking your own fruit. SLF, they do excrete excessive amounts of this honeydew. And unfortunately, we don't have a video, but if you go to YouTube and just search spotted lanternfly feeding honeydew, I've seen personally, I'm from just south of Philadelphia, and so I have personal experience with this, and I've walked underneath a willow tree, and it was like it was raining. It was just that much honeydew coming off of this tree from these guys feeding, and it was gross and yet still fantastic. I mean, it was fascinating, but we got it taken care of. Anyways, some other damage and impact that it'll have on plants is, obviously, it's not just the fruit that's going to get covered in this honeydew and sooty mold. It's also the lower foliage, whether it's of that specific host or of understory plants. And so what happens is you have this sooty mold that will grow and block and reduce photosynthesis, the tree's ability to create food for itself. And so you have these indirect issues as well. If you have pachysandra or hostas or some sort of annual underneath the host that these things are feeding on, they will also be significantly affected by their feeding as kind of a secondary thing there. The other thing is this honeydew is really high in sugar, and it will ferment. And for those of you who know anything about ambrosia beetles, they are a bunch of little alcoholics, and so they will sense and smell these fermenting sugars and the ethanol that's produced by it, and it will quickly draw them in. And it's the ambrosia beetles and those secondary pests that on our ornamental trees is going to ultimately lead potentially to mortality. And so that's why it is important on our specific hosts. It's still important to treat for them because we want to discourage those secondary pests as well. In addition to, the sooty mold will also build up on, cars and decks and all that sort of thing as well. So there's quite a bit of an impact from their byproduct. Here's a perfect example. So, like I said, spotted lanternfly in the ornamental landscape is considered right now to be a nuisance pest. It's annoying as crap, and it will fly right into your face. It will make sitting in your backyard and on your back patio and on your deck and grilling miserable. You can see that bottom right picture there. They're swarming all over windows or a sliding glass door, whatever that may be. The deck there has been covered in sooty mold, and so they can be really disruptive to your outdoor activities. Once we finally do get some nice weather here, as we get into August and September, when the weather becomes, it's nice fall weather, and you really want to get out and sit on the porch and enjoy the last of the season, they can really become and ruin that for you. So they're definitely a nuisance. Another secondary issue, I guess, so to speak, with them is that honeydew, once again, high in sugar, it attracts stinging insects. And in the fall, when these things are adults and feeding heavily, the yellow jackets especially, and your hornets and wasp species, they're already kind of pissed off and angry. And so you have angry stinging insects being attracted. And so we have trees near play sets or where children are playing, or pick your own orchards. Once again, not only do you have ugly fruit, but now you have yellow jackets to deal with as well. So just to hammer that home, as well as safety for your applicators. Let's say you have applicators, you're sending them out in September to do these treatments. That's something that's important to be aware of, especially if they have an issue with stinging insects already. Maybe they're allergic or something. Some of their host plants, and this is important to keep in mind, their hosts vary based on their life cycle. And so as nymphs, they will feed on hosts that they will not feed on as adults. And so when we're especially using our systemic options, we want to keep that in mind, because if we're out there treating too early, we could be treating, for example, a magnolia that doesn't ultimately need to be treated, because as an adult, when their feeding is actually causing an issue, they have moved on, and you're not going to find them on magnolias. So a few of the key host plants as nymphs are definitely roses and grapes. They really will hang out on roses quite a bit. And grapes, once again, is one that they will feed on for their entire life cycle. So as we look at their adult host list, their tree of heaven, that's a big one, ailanthus, walnuts, birches, willows, silver red maples are big ones, grapes, and then you have locusts and plums and your stone fruits and your orchard grown trees there as well. Pine was on there, but I'm not sure why. It is not actually considered a host of spotted lanternfly. So tree of heaven, Now this is a big one for any of you who've had any sort of maybe experience or seen another webinar or another, read about spotted lanternfly. You've probably also read about tree of heaven or Ailanthus altissima along with it. When this thing first showed up, we were finding it primarily on tree of heaven. We still do actually find it primarily on tree of heaven. But the initial thoughts were that tree of heaven was needed to complete their life cycle. And the latest research that's out there has actually shown that it is not. It is not required to feed on ailanthus in order to complete its life cycle. It can complete its life cycle completely away from ailanthus trees. That being said, ailanthus is still one of its preferred, if not the preferred host for spotted lanternfly. And probably the reason for that is it's tree of heaven is also invasive to United States, but it is from spotted lanternfly's native range. So my guess is it was just familiar to them. And while they were trying other things, they knew, hey, we have this Atlantis tree that we know for sure we like. So that's an important note when it comes to management as well. Now that we know that it's not required, while it still plays an important role in our management efforts, it's not as important of a role as we had initially thought. Now we're going to get into the life stages of spotted lanternfly. So spotted lanternfly overwinters as an egg in an egg mass, as you can see on that bottom right photo. In May, it's going to hatch, and the months will vary depending on as this thing spreads and changes locations. But for right now, in the areas it's in, about May is when it's going to hatch. And then it will go through 4 instar stages before becoming an adult. And these instar stages are, they're very, very small. And they're going to be all black with white spots until they get to that 4th instar, where you can start to see that red coloration on their back. A couple notes about these early instars, especially the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd ones, is these suckers are fast. And one of the management techniques that I've heard since the very beginning is the smash and stomp method. And as these early instars, that method, you have to be really good for that, to do that. These things are fast, and I've made myself look like a fool more than a few times trying to stomp on these things with no luck at all. So they're very quick. And then as they get into their 4th instar stage, not only are they much easier to see now because they have that red coloration, they're much larger. They're about 2 to 3 times the size as their 1st instar when they initially hatched. But they're also becoming a little slower. And then as they get into their adult stage, they're that's where I can thrive with that smash and stomp method, because they're much, much, much slower and easier to stomp on. But another note about the instar stage, I've found that the 4th instar stage, as far as our scouting efforts go, if we're not scouting for egg masses in the dormant season and we're scouting during our growing season, the 4th instar is the easiest one to see. Even so much more, I'd even argue it's easier to see than the adults, because while the adults do have red coloration on their wings, for the most part, when they're feeding or sitting still, unless they're actually flying or hopping, that red coloration on their wings is covered and hidden, and their top wings there blend into the most of their hosts very, very well. So as a 4th instar, that red coloration really stands out. The differences between the male and female adults, pretty simple. You have to just look at their abdomen. As females, when they're pregnant, they will get a yellow coloration and their abdomens will swell. And you can see the abdomen on that female is quite a bit larger than the male on the left there. To get a little bit more in depth on their life cycle, we have eggs, and they're present between late September all the way through into May and June. They blend in really, really well. In a few slides, we're going to take a look at a few more of the egg masses, and you'll really get a feel for how well these things blend in. But especially on rocks, these, like, they disappear. After they hatch and get into their 1st through 3rd instar stages, which in the area they're in now is going to be roughly May through July is when you'll see the 1st through 3rd instars starting in May. Now on this chart, which is available in our spotted lanternfly manual, which we'll go through a little later, we also added the growing degree days, because as this thing spreads and gets into different areas of the country, these months are going to be less and less accurate. And so with the growing degree days, that enables us to get a much more accurate feel as to when these things are going to be hatching and in what life stage they're going to actually be in. So keeping track of the growing degree days is important. Their 4th instar, you're going to start to see 4th instars July through September, and then you'll see most of your adults in mid-September through really the 1st or 2nd hard frost is what's going to knock most of those out. So depending on where you're at, that could be as late as December. Generally in my area, it's around November we're seeing most of them are dead and done. The time of year and stage of the insect can also help you locate when they are in the landscape. So, like I said, first through third instars, they're going to be feeding on primarily herbaceous plants throughout their life cycle. Like I've said a few times already, they will make use of just about every vegetative material that's available to them. And they feed on a very, very wide range of hosts, as we saw earlier. But they're going to start moving on to the woody plants in their fourth instar stage. And then as adults, they're primarily feeding, while you will find them on the midribs and petioles of some leaves, you're primarily going to be finding them on the trunks and branches of these trees, and that's where and vines, and that's where you're going to be finding the majority of them. As we get into the egg stage here, this is a slide that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on because this is one that's really, really important. The egg laying stage and the egg portion of this pest life cycle is super, super important. The reason we're getting these satellite infestations, these satellite populations of spotted lanternfly, is because these things will lay eggs not just on their hosts. They will also lay eggs, as you'll see on the next slide, on just about anything. Whatever's convenient and whatever they just happen to land on at the time when they're ready to lay eggs. It's kind of what it seems like. But each female can be responsible for up to 2 to 3 egg masses a year. And these egg masses will consist of 30 to 60 eggs per mass. So one female can be responsible for potentially up to 180 new lanternflies come spring and early summer. What they'll do is when they lay these eggs, they lay them in rows, and then they cover them in this waxy secretion. And if you look at that picture on the right, that is a female actively covering her egg mass. So you can see the rows, and you can also see that light waxy coating as it's being applied. Now, if you look at the picture on the left or on the top, you can see that egg mass, they look a little different. And what happens is that bright coloration fades really quickly, especially as you go through the season, and they become much darker and more gray and blend in much, much easier. And so it's important when you're looking for these egg masses to be scouting earlier in the season. It's going to be easier for you to see them because they won't have faded as much. Additionally, for those of us who are in the Northeast, primarily like in Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and a lot of the other Northeastern states that are dealing with gypsy moth has become an issue over the last couple of years, a significant issue again. As this spotted lanternfly is moving up into those areas, they have very, very similar egg masses. And I apologize. I realize it's called the fuzzy moth now. I don't think gypsy moth is the right word for it anymore, but whatever it's called now. They have very similar egg masses. But if you look at that picture on the bottom left, you can see the difference. On the right, we have our fuzzy moth or gypsy moth egg mass. And that's going to be a much more brown, and it's actually going to have a furry or hairy texture to it. Whereas the spotted lanternfly egg mass is going to be much grayer. Sometimes it looks like cracked mud or, dried mud. And it's usually going to be a little smaller as well. But that's a really good comparison picture to give you an idea of the difference between these two egg masses. As far as where they will lay their egg masses, like I said, anywheres. Anything is free game. Rusty metal, so frames of vehicles. You can see the burn barrel there on the right. Fence posts, camping chairs or hammocks or whatever that, patio furniture. Underneath the railings of decks, outdoor furniture, light bulbs. That top left picture, that's kind of a surprising one, but hey, they'll lay them on light bulbs. I've seen them on the dormers of buildings, and the biggest one is shipping crates and pallets, frames of RVs potentially, and vehicles. Because they will literally lay their eggs anywheres. That's why we have such an issue. That's why, if you remember back to that when I was talking about the spread through, I-80 and 76, the turnpikes. That's why we're seeing that spread, is because, well, yeah, we can get a few adult hitchhikers. It's the egg masses, those trucks or that RV is camped in Mrs. Jones's yard and in September when they're laying eggs, and then come June, they go on vacation out in wherever, and they just took however many egg masses times 50. They just took that many lanternflies out of the quarantine zones and into a potentially new area where they could infest. And so that's why this slide, if nothing else, is what I'd like you to take away from this presentation, is something that's really important. And the way we combat this is through quarantine zones. In Pennsylvania, this is where this first showed up. They put a lot of emphasis and effort on quarantine zones and inspecting your loads and your crated materials and your vehicles before you leave these quarantine zones. And that's up to everybody, homeowners included. It's going to be up to us to make sure that we're not taking this thing and spreading it where it's not already. Slowing the spread is incredibly important. So these are just some of the things in the Pennsylvania quarantine zone specifically that you're not able to move out of the quarantine zone. Firewood is an obvious and big one, just like most of our other pests that we quarantine. Nursery stock is another big one. Brush debris, yard waste. I know in certain areas of Delaware, they were actually closing their municipal and city yard waste dumps in an effort to slow down the introduction of spotted lanternfly before it had showed up in Delaware. They had done that as an effort to kind of slow down and help prevent the introduction of spotted lanternfly. And whether it worked or not, who knows? But it's important. There are a few things with the PA quarantine order, the Pennsylvania quarantine, that are a little unique. And one of those is that the property owner is actually the one that's responsible for controlling or eliminating any life stage of spotted lanternfly that is on their property. Whether this is removing tree of heaven, putting up sticky bands, which is a very, very popular thing for homeowners to do, making treatments or hiring somebody to make a treatment. But it's up to the homeowners. In New Jersey, the Secretary of Agriculture can also issue a treatment order. The other states don't have treatment requirements as of yet, just restrictions on the movement of specific materials. So now that we kind of have a really good background and understanding of what spotted lanternfly is, why it's so impactful and all that, we're going to get into a little bit of the research on why we recommend what we do to manage this. And so to begin with, foliar sprays are kind of what's a lot of the larger entities like the states are going towards, bifenthrin cover sprays, for better or worse. This is a study that Dr. Bittinger and Heather Leach from Penn State conducted on spray trials. And what they found is basically that spotted lanternfly is really easy to kill with contact sprays. You can see up until you get to way to butcher that word, acetamiprid and spinosad, that pretty much all those other actives are very, very, very effective at killing this thing. Spotted lanternflies actually are incredibly easy to kill. Just as kind of a side note tangent here, I was talking to a researcher. We're doing research right now currently. We're looking for a non-neonic systemic insecticide to help control these things. And as I was talking to one of the researchers about his work, he mentioned that even collecting these things in order to do research on them, it's easy to kill them just by handling them. So they're not as robust of an insect as you'd think looking at them. They're really large, but they're actually, and you'll see in some of the later trials as we go through these, that played a part in some of the other trials that we did as well, that even as later instars and adults, just by handling them a little bit too much, you can kill them. So very easy to kill. But I digress. This is the important slide when we talk about foliar and cover sprays and contacts, insecticides. And this is because this is looking at the residual activity of these active ingredients. And when you look at the residual activity, that blue column there is 7 days after treatment, whereas that orange column is 14 days. And you can immediately see that that is why bifenthrin is the preferred contact insect active ingredient to control these things. You're going to get up to 3 to 4 weeks of control residually with bifenthrin, whereas with a lot of the other ones, like especially carbaryl and acephate, you're going to get little to no residual activity out of it. So that's why bifenthrin is the preferred active for controlling these things as a contact. As we get into systemic treatments, dinotefuran is far and away the clear winner as far as our systemic options go. This is a graph from a trial that we conducted with Dr. Phil Lewis from USDA. These trees were treated with Transect infusible at the 1.5 mil per diameter inch rate, or Transect as a systemic bark spray at the 12 packet per gallon rate. What we did was we then placed tarps underneath the trees, and the number of dead lanternflies were counted that were on those tarps. Both Transect infusible and Transect as a bark spray proved to be great control, and thousands of lanternflies were killed. You can see, up to almost 10,000. So fantastic results. Here are some pictures from that trial. On the left, you can see the adults feeding on one of our control trees. And then on the right, you can see the tarping method we were using. This is 4 hours after treatment with Transect infusible, which is our root flare injected product. So 4 hours, and we've already got a pretty substantial pile of dead lanternflies on that tarp. So pretty neat. We have lots of people that ask about imidacloprid and whether or not imidacloprid is an effective product to use on spotted lanternfly. Based on work in Korea and by Penn State, imidacloprid is found to be inconsistent for efficacy. In 2020, we conducted a trial as well with Eric Day at Virginia Tech, where we compared imidacloprid using the highest labeled rate for soil application and the highest rate for tree injection against the standard rate of Transect as a bark spray and the lowest dose of Transect infusible as a root flare injection. We followed the same tarping method in our previous trial that we just looked at, and tarps were placed in evaluations. We started our evaluations at 6 weeks after treatment. What you can see from this chart here is that Transect and Transect infusible are working immediately and over the entire length of the trial, and they're highly effective. But unfortunately, our imidacloprid treatments didn't really start working until about 10 weeks after treatment, and were quite simply just inferior to the Transect treatments. The extended time to work and the lower efficacy rates are likely the reasons Penn State lists imidacloprid as inconsistent. And if you are thinking to just treat earlier in the season, you need to consider that that is also when a lot of our trees and shrubs are blooming, and our pollinator concerns are still a thing with both of these products. And as well as another consideration is when we talked about how they will feed on hosts as nymphs that they will not feed on as adults. And so unless you know exactly which trees you want to treat, you can be fooled if you see nymphs on something that they're not going to be feeding on as adults. So another reason that treating earlier is less desirable. Many of the state treatment programs want to start applications as early as possible. So in 2020, we conducted a trial with Dr. Jim Steffel on Tree of Heaven to see if spring treatments with Transect at the 12 packet rate and Transect infusible at the 1 milliliter per inch rate would last the entire year. Trees were treated in May, and then beginning in August, mesh cages were placed around the trunks of trees. Lanternflies were then placed inside these cages where they were left for 7 days, and the percentage of lanternflies that were killed were recorded. The results show that both Transect bark spray and Transect infusible provide control for at least 5 months. Note that there is a high mortality in the untreated control trees. This goes back to that thing I was talking about earlier, where handling them can be difficult. Collecting them can be difficult. What these things were actually doing was these adults were wedging themselves between the bottom of the cage and the trunk of the tree and killing themselves that way. Whether intentionally or not, I do not know. But that is why, if you look at the untreated control, we still have this pretty decent data there for untreated controls, at least. Our recommendation after this trial is that treatments in July or early August, because not just because of our efficacy and residual, but also because of pollinator concerns. However, if you do need to treat in May or June and you can do so responsibly, your treatments will still be effective. And finally, our last section here, we're going to get into our management strategies. How to manage these things. What tools do we have in our toolbox in order to manage these things? Tree removal, that's an obvious one. We're going to go through egg scraping, tree banding, foliar sprays, and then as last systemic treatments. So tree removal, especially tree of heaven, Ailanthus trees, is one of the big ways that states, as well as even just homeowners, can control these things on their properties. An important consideration when you're removing Ailanthus trees is they will resprout and be twice as big as they originally were very, very quickly. So when you do cut down tree of heaven, it's very, very important that you treat it with an herbicide like triclopyr. Our product is called Sightline. As soon as possible, right after the tree has been cut down. And what that's going to do is that's going to prevent it from resprouting, because if you don't do that, like I said, it's just going to resprout. You're going to be stuck with an even larger tree. Another issue. Egg scraping. And while this is effective for the egg masses that you can reach and see from the ground, it's more of a feel-good solution. It makes you feel good. It's really not effective as a treatment, as a management technique by itself, because these things will lay eggs throughout the entire crown of a tree, as well as, like we talked about earlier, on whatever else they feel like laying eggs on. So if you do find egg masses on, I don't know, the tire of your car, please do scrape them off. You're going to want to put them in some sort of alcohol solution, like hand sanitizer works well, in a bag, and just seal that bag up and cover them with the hand sanitizer, and then you can, dispose of them. They're done. Once again, because they will lay eggs super high up into the canopy of these trees, scraping is not really that practical as a management technique, especially as a professional arborist. You're not going to be selling egg scraping treatments to clients. At least I'd hope you wouldn't be. Tree bands. Now this is one that tree bands I consider more of a scouting tool. They're effective against early instars, early nymphs, first, second, maybe even third nymphs. But what you'll find and what you'll see as these things get into your area, what you've already seen, is that these nymphs, because we have such high populations, they will completely cover this sticky band in no time at all. And then they just walk over the backs of all their fallen brethren, and they can continue up the tree, and the sticky bands are no longer effective. So unless you're replacing them constantly, they're not really that effective of a management strategy. They're great for scouting. If you're in an area where you're not really sure what the population's looking like, you can put a few of these out and see, all right, now we have I'm getting a ton of these first instars on my sticky band, so we're probably going to have a high population this year. Another big downside of this thing with sticky bands is you can get unintentional, bycatch. So birds and beneficial insects will also be caught in these traps, and especially birds and small animals, squirrels. I've seen a squirrel that it got free, but it wasn't easy. So you have those sort of concerns as well. One thing, if you are going to use these sticky traps, is please put some sort of cage around them to help prevent our squirrels and birds from getting caught up in them. And then we have our chemical control. So we have foliar sprays. And as we talked about earlier, foliar sprays, especially bifenthrin, are very, very effective. Bifen XTS at the 12.8 ounce per 100 gallon rate, Upstart Gold at our 21.7 ounce per 100 gallon rate are both the rates that you would use as a foliar knockdown spray. You're going to get contact kill with either of these for 3 to 4 weeks. And this is a great way to control nymphs and adults. You're going to target shrubs early in the season, and you're going to get really, really quick knockdown. There are some concerns with these sprays, though. These are bifenthrin as a contact. It's going to also kill your beneficials. You have to be very careful if you're going to apply it. You don't want to apply to any kind of flowering, anything in flower, obviously, because we're still going to be affecting our pollinator population. As well, the public perception and environmental concerns are a big deal as well. As companies, we want to be as responsible and ethical as we can be. And while there is still a very big and very good argument to be had for bifenthrin sprays, there are still quite a bit of things that we should be considering prior to doing these treatments. Systemic treatments, which is by far the preferred way of doing it, are going to be done with dinotefron. Dinotefron is the active ingredient that has shown the absolute far and above the best results at controlling these things. We're going to get really good residual, and we're going to get really quick and effective knockdown. Transtect and Transtect Infusible are our products. And like I said, it's going to be the best choice realistically for your treatment option. Transtect, it's 70% dinotefron. They are water-soluble packets. And the application of this stuff doesn't get any easier. It's a basal trunk spray. So you're spraying the bottom 6 feet of your trunk. You're just spraying it to wet. And because these are water-soluble packets, it's as simple as taking your backpack or your hand spray or whatever you're using, putting your gallon of water, and then just dropping your 12 packets in. So I like to tell people as a joke is, if you can count to 12, you can treat for spotted lanternfly, because it's really that simple. These packets will dissolve. You shake up your reservoir, whatever it is, and then you're ready to spray. Some people will add in a surfactant, some sort of pentrabark as well. It's not 100% necessary, but it will give you a little bit quicker control. It'll get that product in there a little bit quicker through the bark. USDA and state treatment programs are all using, or most of them are using Transtect. And we also have 24C labels so that you are able to apply more per acre than you normally would be able to with this product, which enables that. That's why we have that higher rate. Transtect Infusible, which is our root flare injectable product. And this is 22.5. It's sold in a 1 pint unit. It is micro injection, and the rate is incredibly low at 1 milliliter per inch of diameter. This is a great option for use near ponds or waterways, or if you're in a really public area where bark sprays may not be the best option if you're near a vegetable garden, things like that. And it also gives you another option for staying within your pounds per acre limits. Because it's a really low rate, it makes it a little easier to do that in some areas. There are pros and cons to this. Really, the only con is that it is root flare injectables. Whether that's a con or not, I'm not sure, but it is a consideration. And it will take a little bit longer, obviously, than the trunk spray will. It doesn't get easier than the trunk spray, but it is, as an injectable, another tool in our toolbox to control this thing in certain areas. The pros are it's a low volume injection. You're going to get super fast uptake. You're going to get really fast results. If you remember back to that one trial, we were getting results in as little as 4 hours with this. So as a client, you would be probably pretty thrilled if you were able to see results that quickly. I know I would be. And it's all contained within the tree. So very minimal impact to non-target organisms, primarily people and other, our beneficial populations. You can apply this thing through, I'm just checking my time here. We got about 10 minutes. You can apply this thing through a number of injection pieces of equipment. We have our Q-Connect system, which we've had out on the market for a while. And then also this picture on the bottom right here is of our Quantum. And this is a new piece of injection equipment that we've come out with. We'll be shipping it in the spring. And it is a plugless system, single port injection. If you want any more information about this, please reach out to either myself or the technical support team or your territory manager, if you know who that is, to get a little more information about this. It is brand new. And that's it on that. Now, this slide summarizes the treatment options by time of year and the stage that our insect is in. And you can find this slide. I'm not going to go into detail with it right now because I'm going to get time for questions. But you can find that and many other charts and a lot of really good information in our Spotted Lanternfly management guide. And this is a guide that is free for you. If it's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us and we'll get you a copy, whether it's digital or paperback, I guess. I don't know. We'll get you a copy of this. It is full of excellent information and provides great guidance for landscape and arboriculture professionals on how to recommend treatments for their clients and based on their clients' tolerance level as well. As far as the tolerance level goes, there are things to consider when you're selling these treatments or recommending these treatments to your clients, and that is their tolerance level. Do they have a really high tolerance of this and they just want their trees to remain healthy? Or do they have a really low tolerance and they don't want to see one single spotted lanternfly on their property and they don't want to see any honeydew or anything like that? So finding out what their tolerance level is really important on what you recommend to them as treatment options. Some other things to consider are the time of year you want to treat, the plant material you're treating, and then the site restrictions. That goes all back to, pools and vegetable gardens and koi ponds and all that kind of stuff, as well as our client expectations. It may be well that our client, they don't care about anything other than they don't want to park their car underneath their tree and have it covered in honeydew. So they're just worried about that one tree because they parked their car underneath there, or maybe it's a playground, or maybe it's a sidewalk, things like that. So it's really important to take all these considerations into account. Once you have all those, you can decide, okay, we have a 0 or low tolerance plan, or we have a mid to high tolerance plan. If you determine that you have a 0 to low tolerance plan, these are our recommendations, and it's removing all Atlantis from properties and creating trap trees. So leaving 1 or 2 as treated trees, as trap trees. And quite frankly, this should be done really everywhere because Atlantis trees are junk trees anyways. And then also you're going to begin bifenthrin foliar spray treatments in late spring and continue to monitor high traffic areas throughout the season and spot treat as needed. If a property borders wooded or natural areas, you're also going to want to treat those plants that are along the edges. Consider using sticky bands to monitor. You can rotate them out every couple weeks, as well as Transtect at a high rate bark spray right around the emergence of your 4th instar. So that's usually around late July and August. And then if necessary, you can do fall applications of bifenthrin. In our moderate and high tolerance client in areas, we're going to be just focusing on treating trees in high use areas. So long pools, patios, play areas, driveways, etc. We're going to spot spray local populations that may be higher than we want, and probably going to consider or just remove Atlantis and create some trap trees. This is a look at a residential property and some of the areas that you would potentially be targeting. For someone with a medium to high tolerance, you would be treating just kind of around the pool and driveway and then maybe doing some spot treatments. For somebody with a 0 tolerance, you're going to be doing the edges along the woods like we talked about, treating all the host plants that are there, and then definitely removing your Atlantis trees. On our commercial properties, for our, the areas we're looking for on our commercial properties are primarily island plantings, trees that are host trees along walkways or in front of the building. But primarily these are going to be lower tolerance. You can also, if you do have border plantings, if it backs up along a wood's edge or something, you're also going to be treating those, and definitely removing all of your tree of heaven once again. And with that, we have quite a few. We have 5 minutes for questions. And actually, if you have to get going at the top of the hour, please do. You will still get credit. I believe Allison put the ISA code in the chat, or she will be soon.
Nope, you guys have to be on for the time, so I'll put it in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so we got about 5 minutes left.
Cool.
Sorry, jumping the gun there a little bit.
Yep, no worries.
But
right.
Yeah, so we'll answer questions, and I'll be able to stick around a little bit afterwards. But if you have to get going at the top of the hour, please feel free. So with that being said.
Okay, so I just want to say, if you've been typing questions into the chat, and you could please type them into the Q&A. There's a lot of chitter chatter going on, so it's really hard to keep track of those. So I will be going off the Q&A section for starters. So, okay. What defines quarantine?
Quarantine, it goes back to that slide where essentially it's a lot like a lot of the other pests that we have, where we're not going to be allowed to move. Firewood is usually the main one, but also there's also a lot of other plant material that we can't move. So there are zones where we have an active infestation and we want to contain that infestation to that zone. So we call them quarantine zones. But basically it's an area that, it's a lot like when you get the coronavirus and you have to quarantine in your house, that principle, just on a larger scale.
All right. Can you speak more specifically about oaks as a host?
So oaks is one that it's while it's listed on the host species, it's really not a primary host. And while you will find them feeding on it, they're normally going to be younger oaks. So a lot of your mature oaks, you're not really going to have, this is not going to be an issue. This isn't really going to be something that you're looking for on mature oaks. But your younger oaks, 8 to, 20 dBH, you may see some on the trunk and branches of those oaks, but generally they're not in high enough numbers to warrant treatment.
Cool. All right. What, if any, effects would there be for pollinators if they collect excess honeydew from the SLF carcass if the SLF dies from transtect?
Well, that is an excellent question.
That's an interesting question.
That's a doozy. And actually, there is a study that I've read, and I can't remember who did it, but there was a study that was that they took samples of honeydew to find out how much transtect or that dinotephron was actually in that honeydew, and if it would have any effect on pollinators. And to sum it up in a very quick and easy way, the effect was negligible. There was not enough. The parts per million that were found, if any, were negligible. And I will find that article. I know exactly where it is on my computer, but I think that was Steve that asked that question. So I'll send that off to you, Steve, and anybody else. If you're interested in that, I can send me an email and I'll get that information out to you.
Cool. Yeah, and just as a note, we're constantly doing more research on the implications of the products that we're currently using. And then I think Mark alluded to the fact that we're looking for other solutions as well. So please note that this is for the current space and time, and that could change next week if we found something that worked. Okay, has it been studied or have you attempted to identify what SLF feed on and synthesize the chemicals they prefer, then set up traps to kill them, or is it too widespread at this point to use this strategy? So this is multifaceted and a little confusing.
If I'm understanding the question, it sounds like we have our preferred hosts, and those are generally, it's the preferred hosts that we usually do our traps on. There are quite a few really good traps out there that I've seen. I've seen homemade ones that are just fantastic, but generally you're going to be putting those on things like red maples and sugar maples and silver maples, those really the preferred hosts. Japanese snowbell is the one that's a little odd, but they love that. Willows is a big one. So I think I answered that question.
Yeah. So
if you have any
you
more
answered the
questions on
first
that,
part of the question. Yeah, I think that's fine. And I don't know who that was. It's from someone anonymous. If you want to reach
okay.
out to us, Mark's information is
Yeah.
there, or info@Rainbow Ecoscience, and we can help answer further.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we are at 10 my time. So what is that? 1 o'clock Eastern. If you need to jump off, no worries. We will send out the recording so you can watch the ending. The ISA code is in the chat. You do not need this. We will take care of it. But you are now eligible for the full ISA credit if you log off now. So no worries if you cannot stay. Thank you so much for being here with us. We will continue to answer questions though, because we have quite a few more coming through. All right. Any work with neem oil? I can answer this if you don't know.
Yeah, take that one away, Allison.
Cool. Yeah. So I actually worked with Phil Lewis a little bit earlier on when I was still in the Midwest a couple years ago, and they had been doing some work, and it actually worked very, very well if you could coat the specific egg masses with neem oil. But similar to egg scraping, it's really difficult to manage because there's just so many egg masses. But Phil Lewis has more. I'm sure USDA APHIS website has more information on that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Can you apply Transject as a basil drench and still get the same efficacy?
Yeah, you absolutely can. It's a little, actually, Allison, I'm going to defer this one to you as well for the rates, because I can't think of the rates off the top of my head, but you certainly can. I don't know why you would, unless you want, I guess it could be if you were injecting it, for sure. I could see the benefit to that. But yeah, Allison, if you want to take away that.
Yeah. So the reason we recommend the basil spray is mostly because we're typically dealing with multiple trees on a property. So when you're talking about trying to just get it done quick and easy, the spray works better. Also, the rates, as Mark said, it's about double the amount of product to do as a soil drench as it is to do as a basil spray. So A, that's expensive, and B, that's a lot more chemical. So we've been deferring to the basil sprays just because of that. And further, like the Chapin backpack that we use to do those sprays is only like $100. So it's not really cost prohibitive to need that. Okay, once again, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer. I see them coming through the chat and I cannot keep track of them. Sorry. Okay, 2 questions here coming next. Does the injectable dinoteffurin last longer than a basil bark spray?
You're gonna see about the same amount of efficacy as far as length, but with the injectable one, you will start seeing results quicker. Not really that much quicker either. If you remember, we saw 4 hours, we had a pretty good pile. That was with our infusible. Whereas I've seen personally doing these treatments with the bark spray, I've seen results in the same time frame. So you're going to get pretty much about the same with either one.
Cool. And then referring back to a slide, does it say that dino can only be used on Tree of Heaven in New York? And I think that's referring to the 2EE label or whatever.
Yeah, so in New York right now, New York State, you cannot use, you actually can't use infusible at all. So if you're in New York, that question that was an easy answer. As far as Transtech WSP, it is only labeled on Tree of Heaven in New York, as far as I know. So yes, you can only use it on Tree of Heaven right now.
Cool. All right. So there's a lot of questions about biocontrol. I'm going to try to see. I'm going to try to get a few of these. So any updates on the fungus that was killing SLF, and then also questions about is there any other biocontrol? Yeah.
So just to answer all of the biocontrol questions right now, as far as the native fungus that's found natively in a lot of our forests, that is absolutely still making an impact. Unfortunately, it's not as big of an impact as we'd hope, but it is still making. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now. And as far as biological, biocontrols, there are quite a few that are being worked on, not necessarily by us, but those things take a lot of time because we want to make sure that we're not introducing something else new that's going to become an issue. For example, maybe some sort of parasitic wasp that will parasitize spotted lanternfly, but also maybe beneficial. So there's a lot to be vetted out in that process, and it's a very time-consuming process that's being worked on as we speak. But right now, there are no good biocontrols
Okay.
that are effective.
Along the same line, any environmental conditions that are deterring infestations?
Yeah, actually. So, and this is very, very, I want to stress that this is not scientific based knowledge, but in my area, which is southeastern Pennsylvania, this year we should have had, we should have been overrun by these things. And for whatever reason, we weren't. And we did have a storm that blew through in the middle of summer as these things were in their second and third instar stages. And it was a significant storm and a long duration storm. And well, I can't say that storm was the reason that we had lower numbers. Based on what I know about them and what we kind of talked about earlier with how they're not that durable of an insect, it makes sense to me that storm may have played a part in why we didn't see larger numbers. But that's just, I can't stress enough that that's just anecdotal and just things that I've observed as I've, gone about my business. So cool. As far as cold weather, though, as far as cold weather, if that's a question, these things will survive our winters in the areas that they currently are. So even up into Vermont, there is a county in lower Vermont that has an infestation, and they have survived southern Vermont winters. So they're very cold tolerant.
Cool. All right. This is a great question. Why treat a high value tree if the health of the tree won't be impacted? This assumes that the nuisance factor is not a concern.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Is the reason if you have a high value tree, spotted lanternfly alone will more than likely not affect the health of it too dramatically. However, it does weaken the tree and predispose it to secondary pests like those ambrosia beetles. And one thing I've seen, especially on maples, at least in my area, is that ambrosia beetles will already attack a maple readily, especially a weakened one. And so the reason we want to treat our high value trees for spotted lanternfly is that so that we're reducing the chance of these secondary pests coming in and actually creating significant damage or mortality. So that's why we do that.
Cool. And again, I think that goes back to your slide that you talked about what the client's circumstances are, right?
Yeah.
Just want to be clear. Obviously, we're presenting all of the management options here just because this is what we've done all of our research on, but we're not necessarily saying that if your client has a big wooded area that you would want to go and treat everything. If they just have one really valuable walnut that they really care about or something, that would be kind of the idea behind those treatment recommendations. Okay. So there seems to be a couple of themes coming through. One is around grapes. So I'm going to go through that line of questions. And then the next is around evergreens. So are grapevines the only plant species that we're seeing mortality in, or have we seen death in other specific species?
So grapevines are definitely the biggest one and the most impactful one. I think they're pretty much the only one. Grapes are one of the very, very, very few hosts that spotted lanternfly will feed on throughout their entire life cycle. So they can complete an entire life cycle on grapevines alone. Whereas with many of your other hosts, they're only attacking those hosts during certain points in their life cycle. So grapevines are definitely the biggest one. And what they're doing with grapevines is they're not immediately killing them, but they're weakening the grapevines enough that in certain areas, or if you have a really bad winter, that these vines will not survive the winter. And so that's where we're seeing the mortality. Once again, it's really not completely, it's not exactly direct, but definitely it's because of that spotted lanternfly feeding that these grapevines are dying during the winter.
Well, and then the other thing is when the sooty mold gets so bad, it does ruin the
Yeah,
entire crop because it coats the entirety of all the photosynthetic area of the plant. So
yeah,
that's the other answer to that side of the question.
exactly. Yep.
Okay, so can you eat grapes after trans-checked treatments?
Oh, that's another good question. Yeah, no, and actually, Transtect is not labeled for edible fruit trees. Transtect, you're only going to be using Transtect on ornamentals. So, you're going to have to find a contact. More than likely, it's going to be a contact spray that you're using on your edibles. So your grapes and your stone fruits, and you're going to have to do your own research to find the labels that are labeled for that. But generally, that's going to be a contact. I don't think there are any systemic products that would work on edible fruit trees or grapevines. Not that I know of, at least.
No, not that I'm aware of it either. Does SLF feed on the native woodland grape?
Yeah, absolutely. It feeds on. I haven't seen a vine yet that it has. I've seen it on poison ivy, believe it or not, and I wish they got it so they could suffer a little bit. But anyways, yeah, they'll feed because of the way their mouth parts are. It's really easy for them to feed on vines, and so you'll see them on just about any, even the native grapevines that are whatever 3-4 inches thick at times. You'll see them all over it. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So along these last lines, what are organic treatment options?
So there's a lot of the pyrethroid and permethrin based products that work very well
Not
as
organic.
a contact.
Those are
What's
not
that?
organic.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. That's organic. I'm not sure.
Carbaryl I think Carbaryl is the only product that we have seen efficacy with that is technically under USDA organic, if I'm not
Yeah, just
mistaken.
yeah.
And I
that
know
one,
that's the one big one that they're recommending on grapes and fruits at this point. But
okay. Yeah.
cool.
So yeah,
But
carbaryl.
email us if you have more questions, though we are not experts in the organic side of
Yeah.
things. Okay, cool. So I'm just trying to move this along in the respect of time. All right. Do you have any data about spreading into Canada?
No. Simple answer. I do not,
Cool.
but it should be easy to find.
Sweet. Yeah, check out the USDA website too. All right. Management strategy recommendations for community, campus, or town. And I just want to bring this up. I'll answer this. Yes, Jan, we have a ton of information on this, and we actually have an entire PowerPoint that our other territory manager, Bob, put together. So if you want to, Mark, I don't know if you want to make a note of this, Dan Dobromolski, either email us or we'll try to email you. We can send you some of those slides and walk you through that process. But yes, we kind of utilize the whole toolbox approach to identify where you can do trap trees, where you can do removals, and how you might need to manage based on your client concerns. Okay, now last sort of questions. Oh wait, one more relates to this. Comments on using acelepryn on blooming roses and rates. Are we seeing efficacy with acelepryn?
Not that I know of. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't think we're seeing efficacy with acelepryn. Acelepryn is going to really thrive with your Lepidoptera species primarily. And so this being a true bug, I don't think we'll see any sort of results.
Cool. All right. So, are we taking any preventative actions for SLF? Have we found any of those?
Yeah, I mean, preventative wise, on a large level, a state level, the quarantine zones that's their main goal, is to keep these things at bay. Other things that they're doing at a state level are they're removing ailanthus trees in areas using like the hack and squirt. So they're going through and killing ailanthus trees in order to try and slow down the spread of this thing. But really, as far as preventative goes, it's kind of up to us as citizens to just simply make sure that we're not spreading it ourselves with things that we transport out of active infestations.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Couple of questions about evergreens. Have we seen SLF feed on evergreen trees or shrubs?
No, but I have seen egg masses on Christmas trees. So still important. That was a big deal this year in this area was making sure that the Christmas trees that were being sold didn't have egg masses on them, because once again, they'll lay eggs on anything, even if it's not a host.
Cool. All right. All right. So we had 3 questions about whether they were killing evergreens, and it seems to be no. Okay. And then thank you, Russell, for commenting. Carbaryl is not labeled as an organic treatment, but it is labeled for conventional fruit for apples and grapes. So thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate your insight on that. So I guess the answer to the question is we do not know of any organic treatments at this point. Again, USDA might have a little bit more information.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And then last one, Mary, anyone tried trapping SLF and using them as a food source for farm animals? For chickens, anything like this?
Probably on a small scale. I'm sure there's been people that have done it. I've had people come up to me at trade shows and tell me that they've seen. I've had people tell me both things. I've had people tell me that they will actually kill them and then try and feed them to the chickens, and the chickens want nothing to do with it. And then I've also heard people tell me that their chickens will actively chase these things down. Chickens are weird. They're not exactly the brightest creatures, so they may just be chasing them down for fun. I have no idea. But as far as like actual scientific evidence, if chickens are eating them or not, I have no idea. It'd be cool to try though.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
have chickens, or I'd try it.
Unfortunately, the amount of research money to trap SLF and feed them to chickens is limited. Okay, I think we got all of your questions. We are quarter past, so we really appreciate those of you who stuck with us. Please email us. Mark's info is right there. Also, info at rainbowecoscience.com.